Well, I'll start at the beginning, briefly. When we were kids growing up, before we ever met each other, it's many, many years ago, we both read this book. And when we finally met in art school, we talked about it. It's one of the amazing things we had in common. It's a book called I Married Adventure by Osa Johnson. It's about her and her husband Martin's travels around the world. And they saw and did things back in the 1920s before people could even imagine such places as they'd been. They took movies, they had stories, they became extremely famous bringing all this stuff back. And I remember Betsy had the same feeling when she said, "Boy, what a way to live your life." But we dreamed about that. It's a dream, and I said, "Boy, I just want to get on a plane and go somewhere." And we finally ended up. In the end, we married adventure ourselves. So we're going to tell you a little bit about some of the stories behind these things.
We thought we would start with a little prelude in the book here, prologue. And
Let me get under the light.
here, you get over here. Then you got to work that.
No, stay there. Stay there. I don't want to do that.
That's okay.
Okay.
We have seen.
Here we go. Okay. Good.
Shut up.
Go ahead.
We have seen some amazing things in our lives. We've stepped out of a lava at midnight, 120 miles above the Arctic Circle.
Wait a minute. I touched something.
At
What'd I do?
30 degrees. Oh.
I told you I didn't want to stand over stand. I get anywhere near those keyboards and they do something weird.
No worries. Touch nothing.
All right. Sorry. I try not to do that again. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're ready.
Once more.
Now we're ready.
We have seen some amazing things in our lives. We have stepped out of a lava at midnight, 120 miles above the Arctic Circle, at 30 degrees below zero, and seen the shimmering green lights of the aurora borealis.
We have placed our hands in the still warm flank of a tiger killed moments earlier by a rival tiger.
We have seen a pack of Cape hunting dogs tear an impala fawn to bits in the blink of an eye.
We have seen a lone white wolf stampede a herd of wood buffalo in the Northwest Territory.
We have seen thousands of pilgrims swarm down the Ghats and Benares to bathe and purify their souls in the Ganges.
On Yellowwater Billabong, we have seen a green tree python slowly swallow another snake head first.
We have seen a scorpion spider the size of a dinner plate on a night walk in the Peruvian jungle.
We have seen chimpanzees hunt, kill, and devour a red-tailed monkey in Chibali Forest in Uganda.
On the Siberian border of Mongolia, we have seen a reindeer shaman dance and heard her speak in tongues.
We have seen the blue-footed boobies and browed albatross with 12-foot wingspans dance on Hood Island in the Galapagos.
We have seen a herd of reindeer in northern Norway race by us in the snow, sending up ice crystals tinted rose by the setting sun.
We have seen a deadly puff adder slither silently beside us as we sketched a hartebeest carcass in the Kalahari.
We have sat 10 feet away from a 500-pound silverback mountain gorilla in the impenetrable forest of Uganda.
There are still so many things to see, like the ancient city of Petra, carved out of solid stone, or Cossacks hunting with golden eagles, or maybe even starships off Venus. Now, this is kind of...
this is going to be a story from... Am I going to start with this one?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Okay.
This kind of sets the scene for how let's begin.
And I'm going to switch this now. Let me see, where are we here? We'll get used to this in a minute. Or not.
These stories are going to be set in Africa.
The first couple, yes. Our whole life of travel started in a phone booth. Our first date confirmed that we were meant for each other. We loved the same movies, had the same sense of humor, and loved animals. All Ted had to do was show me photos of his pet lion cub and chimpanzee, and I was hooked. The biggest dream we shared was to travel to East Africa to see the great herds of the Serengeti before they disappeared altogether. Since we were just married and short on cash, it didn't seem to be within our reach. One day I was walking down Madison Avenue, and I looked up to see a big sign on the side of a building that read Adventure Travel. I decided it was a good omen, so heart pounding, I found myself climbing the stairs to their second-floor offices. An hour later, I found myself in a phone booth calling Ted. "Guess what?" I said. "We're going to Africa." Finally, the childhood dream of a little girl from Clearfield, Pennsylvania, and a little boy 300 miles away in Buffalo, New York, was about to come true. Our big adventure to East Africa was to set the tenor of our lives. We saw herds of wildebeest, 1,000,000 strong, on the Serengeti Plain. We saw black rhino, elephant, lion, leopard, giant forest hog, and gorgeous birds like carmine bee-eaters, lilac-breasted rollers, and forest kingfishers that light up the sky like fireworks. We saw tens of thousands of flamingos feeding in the Ngorongoro crater and the famous tree-climbing lions of Manyara. We visited nearby Olduvai Gorge, where we saw the skull of the oldest humanoid in the world, where it was discovered. Some Africans told us then, "You should have seen this in the 1950s. Well, this was 1970. The last time we were there in Uganda was in 1997, and they said, "We wish you could have seen this in the 70s. We had.
This is called The Artist's Eye. These are all set in Africa, these stories. One day in a game drive just outside Nairobi, we came upon a grazing antelope with lyre-shaped horns called a topi. We stood up in the van for a better view from the roof hatch. The sun shone on its mostly gray coat. As the topi raised its head, its neck and back turned to a kaleidoscope of color. "Look at the gorgeous pinks and lavenders and the golden glow," I said. "I see purples and tinges of blue and copper," said Betsy. There was a couple standing next to us. I heard the wife whisper to her husband, "Are they looking at the same animal we are?" Somehow that told us we should go keep traveling and seeing the world like nobody else sees it.
Okay, this one is a story from Morocco called Saffron Man, Taradant, Morocco, December 1994. On the road to Taradant, in an area known the world over for growing saffron, the spice that gives such pungent flavor and deep orange color to food. It's very precious as it comes from the stigma of the crocus flower and is picked by hand. There was a tiny roadside shop in the middle of these vast fields of flowers where a man was selling the saffron. We went into his dark little shop with our guide Brahim. The turbaned saffron man nodded, offered us mint tea poured from a silver pot into tiny glasses. Through Brahim, we asked the price of the saffron. $15, said Brahim. $15 a pound? We thought that was really cheap. At home, it costs a fortune for a tiny little glass vial. We told Brahim, "Tell him we'll take 4 pounds. The saffron seller's eyes really lit up, and he replaced the tiny balance scale on his counter with a larger one. He carefully poured a large pile of the saffron onto the scale and checked the weight. $15 a pound is really cheap, we told Brahim. "It is $15 an ounce," said Brahim. He spoke to the saffron seller, whose face wilted as he carefully poured the saffron back into its jar. "We'll take an ounce, please."
This story is set in Uganda in Africa. What you see here. Windy Impenetrable Forest, Uganda, December 1997. Things had been quiet for a while, so we decided to take this window of opportunity and go. We'd been planning a journey to see the mountain gorillas for 5 years, but things kept happening. First the civil war in Rwanda, then unrest next door in Congo. We had heard of a group of mountain gorillas in a place called Windy Impenetrable Forest in Uganda, but Uganda was having its own civil war in the north. We called the American embassy in Kampala. "You didn't hear it from us, but I wouldn't go to Windy myself," said the voice on the other end of the phone. But now it all seemed to have quieted down, not counting the 250,000 refugees and an outbreak of cholera in Goma, just 15 miles south of Windy. We finalized our plans for a car driver and guide with an African company to be paid in advance US dollars, cash. They assured us it was safe. When we landed at the airport in Kampala, our guide Dolores rushed up to us and embraced us. "You are here at long last." That night we waited nervously with pockets full of cash in a seedy little hotel on a back street. The rep from the company showed up, never looked at us, which made us very uneasy, took the money, counted it quickly, and left. The next morning, Dolores showed up with a van and a driver, and we headed for the back country. 30 miles from town, the tarmac ran out, and red mud tracks took over. The countryside was beaten and bruised from years of civil war. We slid and skidded in the muck, got bogged down in more than once, but finally, 9 hours later, we arrived at the lantern-lit African Pearl cottages in Windy. That night, as we stowed our gear and ready for bed, we couldn't help discussing what would be the best escape route if there was any kind of trouble. Maybe we'd slip out of the back door of the cottage and hide in the dense jungle. The next morning, Dolores handed us over to Windy Guide and told us our trek would be about 3 hours at most. As we headed up the mountain, we passed guards with automatic weapons. They are there to protect the gorillas from the poachers, our guide was quick to say. 9 muddy, exhausting hours later, we had just about given up on ever seeing gorillas when our guide said, "The gorillas, they are just there." We could see the vegetation moving, but we couldn't see them at all. We could hear their grunts. It sounds like It sounded like people clearing their throats. We moved closer through the knee-deep nettles, tearing at our legs. Our guides reached out and pulled back a tangled brillantasia vine like a curtain, and there all 500 magnificent pounds of him sat Kachupira, the silverback leader of this group. He was stuffing stems and leaves in his mouth. We were just 10 feet from him. He ignored us completely. We watched him until our allotted hour was up, and we began to trek back in the near dark. Altogether, it had been 12 exhausting hours. We staggered back into camp in the pitch black, covered with mud from slipping and sliding on the treacherous volcanic slopes, soaked with sweat and shivering violently in the night chill. The treacherous volcano slopes, soaked with sweat and slippery violently. Dolores rushed forward and threw her arms around us. "I've never been so glad to see anyone all my life," she cried. It was if we had returned from the dead. "We're filthy," we said. "I don't care. I'm just so glad to see you. Thank God you're okay." We told her the gorillas, once we found them, were awesome, but the trek was brutal and the tangled forest was impossible to walk in. That night, we couldn't get our extreme relief at seeing us out of our minds. After all, we were only trekking to see the mountain gorillas. What could happen? 2 years later, Hutu rebels from the Congo came down the mountain, attacked the camps at Windy, including the African Pearl cottages, shot the guards dead, singled out Americans, kidnapped them, took their shoes, and force marched them up the mountain towards Congo. Those who couldn't make it were killed. Some escaped. When she heard the gunshots, one girl slipped out the back of her tent and hid in the dense jungle.
Lime green rubber boots. Kasane, Uganda, December 1997. We left Windy and were on our way to Queen Elizabeth National Park. As we rode along in our combi, my eyes scanned the mountains. That's where the rebels are, I thought. I wonder if they're watching us with binoculars. We were still jittery after our guide Dolores' extreme relief when we returned to camp so late after visiting the gorillas, and from the lady at Crater Lodge Hotel saying, "Things are quiet for the moment." The jeeps full of combat soldiers that kept passing us didn't help either. We'd been warned about the possibility of fallen trees or other debris that would cause us to stop the vehicle and try to clear the road. It could be a trap. We could be ambushed by rebels hiding in roadside brush who would rob and perhaps even kill us. At last, we stopped for lunch at a small hotel above Kasisi. Sitting at a table on an open patio and still keeping a wary eye on the mountains, we heard the screech of brakes, slamming car doors, and gruff, muffled voices. We jumped up and ran to the steps, where I nearly collided with a soldier the size of a refrigerator in camouflage, a green beret, and green jungle boots. He glared at me stone-faced. "Hello," I said, smiling weakly. He shoved past me like I wasn't there, and he joined the rest of the troops in batting down the doors in the hotel.
Now we're going to India. I'll try to do a couple from each continent. This is called Sloth Bear. India, February 1983. The road was hot, dusty, and jammed with traffic. Huge trucks laden with gravel roared by. The landscape all around us was used up, desolate. Along the road was a man with a bear. It was a half-grown sloth bear. He stood on its hind legs and hugged the man around his waist. At our approach, the man held up a rope that laced through the bear's pierced cheeks and nose. He raised a long staff over the bear's head. The bear began to dance. Sloth bears live deep in the forest. They eat fruit, honey, flowers, and are especially fond of ants and termites. They vacuum them up with special lips and a concave palate. They blow into the nest, then suck up the ants with closed nostrils to prevent the angry ants from going up their noses. They can suck up 10,000 termites at a sitting. They love the flowers of the Macaw tree. When the flowers ferment, they are full of alcohol. The local people think they make the bears drunk, causing them to dance. Paw prints and dung found along cliff edges suggest that the bears sit there to enjoy the panoramic view of the forest below. Other sloth bears carry their young cubs on their backs as they search for food. Rural villagers believe the bear is a protector of little children. This bear dances on the dusty road to Delhi.
There you
go. Guided Camp, Chitwan National Park, Nepal, February 1983. Look, a mongoose, said Betsy. We were sitting by the Dungla River at Guided Camp. The mongoose scooted directly toward us. Don't worry, said the camp manager. That's Bruce. He hangs around the camp. He's okay. Bruce came over to Betsy, crawled into her lap, and draped himself over her shoulder. Betsy was enchanted. She hugged him and kissed him on the head. Look how sweet he is, she said. Later that day, we saw Bruce rooting in a pile of elephant poop to get the partially digested capon. Okay. Now,
Okay, this is Kerala, India, January 1997, Bloodsuckers. We were in the Billigiri Hill Station north of Mysore, the name taken from the exposed white limestone hills thereabouts. We were driving with our guide, Suni, and a ranger armed with a shotgun against wild beasts should we decide to take a hike in the jungle. We came to an enchanted place, a lovely, crystal-clear stream bubbling from a spring that rippled over a rocky bed. We asked if we could stop and explore the place. Suni seemed reluctant, but finally said okay. The ranger with the shotgun went on alert. We got out, set our jackets on a rock, and wandered around the edge of the stream bed. It was an exceptionally beautiful place. Suddenly, we became aware that the ground all around us was moving, crawling. We looked closer. The leaf cover, the ground cover, the water were solid with leeches on the move, inching and humping toward us. There was blood to suck, and they knew it. We grabbed our coats and leaped into the rover. Yeah, that was awful, we said. Suni shook his head apologetically. I was afraid of this. Shake out your coats and check under your pants. We picked up our coats. They were crawling with 2-inch long black leeches. We beat them off, then lifted our pant legs, hands shaking. Attached to our legs, swollen now to twice their size with our blood, were a dozen leeches. We began pulling them off in a panic, blood streaming down our legs from the wounds where they had attached themselves. We worked feverishly, as it was unbearable looking at them sucking away like that. Finally rid of them, we calmed down. We looked at the ranger with his shotgun. The look on his face said, if it had been a tiger, I could have done something. Three Camel Lodge, Mongolia. What was that? We were staying in the Gobi in a big round nomad tent called a ger. A swirling cloud of insects, big ones, little ones, were drawn to the lights above our beds. We watched them dreamily until we felt sleepy, then doused the lights. Immediately they all rained down on us, tick, 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 onto our blankets, our faces, into our eyes and ears and noses like 1,000 tiny pebbles. We sputtered and swatted and flapped the blankets until they disappeared. I was just falling asleep when I heard a shuffling sound. What's that? I whispered to Ted. I don't know. It sounds like someone shuffling around in bedroom slippers. I was almost afraid to shine a flashlight on the intruder, but I did. The slippered intruder turned out to be a huge cricket the size of a cucumber, shuffling across the floor. I shut off the flashlight and sank back on my pillow. I hope he sleeps with Ted and not me.
It's also Mongolia. Mongolian wrestling. Dalanzagad, Mongolia, July 2004. Mongolian wrestlers are national heroes, said our guide Batsurin as we sat on the ground in a big open field in Dalanzagad, a little town in the Gobi. Only men participate, unlike the archery and horse racing events, which include females. Our greatest wrestler bears the title Invincible Titan. In front of us, 6 burly wrestlers flapped their arms gracefully as they performed the falcon dance. They circled their seconds as the formal titles and accomplishments blared over the PA to stir up the fans and unnerve their opponents. Other wrestlers waited their turns by a brightly colored tent set up at the edge of the field. The wrestlers wore colorful leather boots with upturned toes called gutols, short red and blue silk jackets called zodogs, and brief trunks. They removed their janjins, general's hats, and handed them to their seconds. Then they slammed into each other, grabbing the shirts and trunks of their opponent for leverage. Their faces turned scarlet with exertion as they pushed and shoved one another looking for an advantage. The seconds circled constantly encouraging them. Some contests were over in a few seconds. Others ground on in the punishing heat. There was no time limit. Finally, there were only 2 wrestlers left, one in short and stocky like a fire plug, the other 6'5" and lean as a southern preacher. They locked onto each other and strained for 10 minutes. The tall one finally threw his opponent to the ground and stood triumphantly over him. The crowd cheered wildly. Then the loser passed under the winner's raised arm in a traditional gesture of respect. As we watched them don their janjins and strut off the field, we said to Batsorin, "Funny, their shirts have no fronts, just sleeves and a back. Why is that?" "A long time ago," she said, "a lady wrestler disguised as a man won the tournament, only revealing herself as a woman after her victory. Ever since then, the shirts have been frontless." Looking at these huge, hulking men, we thought, that must have been some woman.
And now, I'm going to take you to Europe. This is Gypsy Horses, Ballinasloe, Ireland, October 1996. The horses came tumbling over the slippery stone steps like a black and white tidal wave. The sound of their metal-shod hooves clattered on the hard stone. The shouts of the gypsies and the sound of their whips were gut-wrenching. The steps were too steep for creatures this size, all crowded together, unfamiliar. In their midst, a lean, piebald trotting horse, trapped in the shafts of a sulky, tumbled headlong down with it tied, its driver whipping furiously. At the bottom of the stairs, the makeshift corral, 2 days of rain and mud had now mixed with urine and manure. Gypsy boys, their faces streaked with dried snot, mud, and tears from their own whippings, whipped the giant horses across their rumps and feathered fetlocks. The horses whinnied and surged against the metal poles that had been crudely lashed together to contain them. The boys whipped them, and they kicked out with their hind feet. The gypsy men stepped in with stout sticks and wielded them like batons in a riot. The horses tethered to the poles finally settled down. A red-headed gypsy boy whipped them across their rumps, forcing them even tighter against the fence. He did this every few minutes. A passerby, annoyed by this cruelty, asked, "Why are you whipping those horses?" The boy looked up at him without expression and then whipped the horses again. Blue and yellow. Do we have a picture? I think we do. Okay, now we're going to South America. And this story is called Blue and Yellow, Santa Rosa Lodge, Pantanal, Brazil, August 1988. Besides the wild hyacinth macaws that can be seen there, the Santa Rosa Hotel has a pet blue and yellow macaw. It's very tame. It's fun to watch it crawl over the thatched roofs and hang by one foot, or use its hooked beak to crawl up the branches of trees. One morning, it was sitting on the handle of the water pump. We went over to talk to it. "Arara," said the macaw. "Arara," we answered. It was easier for us to speak its language than for it to speak ours. It flew up onto my shoulder. I was enchanted and touched that it had chosen me instead of Ted. Then it took my whole ear in its razor-sharp bear trap of a beak, tasting it with its black tongue. I was no longer enchanted. I was terrified. Ted laughed till he cried.
Okay. This one's also in South America, set in Brazil. It's called Rio Negro. The sailor and the engineer had just returned from fishing. They had caught a big fruit-eating fish called a pacu and a really big black piranha. They put their skiff alongside a riverboat and tie up. The fish are flopping at the bottom of the skiff, gasping, slowly suffocating. They throw them up on the deck. The black piranha's mouth is gaping open and snapping shut. It has razor-sharp teeth. The fishermen climb aboard and proceed to fillet the pacu while it's still alive, flopping. I decided to put the piranha out of its misery, so I picked up a heavy stick from the deck and gave the piranha a sharp blow behind its head. The blow is not sure, and the fish flops all the harder. The whole crew is gathered around and laughs heartily. My face reddens, but I'm determined to end the suffering of that poor fish. I hit it again as hard as I can. It flops even harder. They laugh even harder. I hit it once more with everything I've got. Finally, it lies still. The crew speaks to one another in Portuguese. I asked my guide, Wilson, what are they saying? He says, they say you enjoy killing.
And now we're going to take you back home to the United States. And this is called The Crater. And it's in Hawaii, Maui, Hawaii in 1973. We were staying with our friend, King Curtis Ayukea, a 300-pound Hawaiian professional wrestler, in his A-frame house on top of the slopes of Haleakala Crater. Over a big bowl of Portuguese stew, he said, "Today we going into the crater. You going to see the nene." That's a very rare Hawaiian goose. With that, his eyes got as big as saucers. We slipped on our backpacks while Curtis saddled his big palomino, Bobby D. Attached to Bobby D's saddle was a saddle holster containing a Winchester rifle. "I'm going to shoot us a goat," he said confidently. Goats are one of many introduced species that are decimating the native flora and fauna of the islands. They're fair game. We dropped down over the lip of the crater, almost 2 miles high, and not far along the sliding sands trail, a big black billy goat stood silhouetted majestically on a jagged lava flow. Curtis reined in Bobby D, slid his Winchester out of its holster, cocked it, raised it to his eye, and took careful aim. We held our breath. Time and the goat stood still. Curtis lowered the rifle. "Oh, I just can't shoot it," he said, shaking his head as he slid the Winchester back in its holster. We exhaled and moved on down the trail. Captain and the Mongoose. After 2 nights in the crater, Curtis took us to his father's ranch on the side of Haleakala. There was much excitement around the barn when we arrived. "I caught me a mongoose," said the captain, Curtis's father, holding up a wire cage. The trapped mongoose paced frantically back and forth. Like goats, mongooses are imported and threaten the native wildlife. "What are you going to do with him?" we asked. "I'm going to drown him," said the captain. "He's not going to steal my chickens." Then he marched purposefully to the horse trough and plunged cage and mongoose into the water. Oddly, the cage was not locked. The door flew open when the cage hit the water, and the mongoose leaped through the air, hitting the ground, running straight into the bush. "Oh, well," said the captain, smiling sheepishly, "I'll get him next time." Somehow we knew he wasn't going to drown that mongoose any more than Curtis was going to shoot that goat. And now I'll take you to the Florida Everglades. Pretty little thing. The Bear Lake Trail in the Florida Everglades had suddenly changed from wide open water and grasses to a dense green tunnel through the mangroves. It was nearly impossible to use our paddles, so we started pulling the canoe along by grabbing the overhead branches of the mangroves. I was in the front of the canoe, and reaching up to grab a branch, I saw right next to my hand a pretty little black snake draped over a branch just above my head. I had almost touched it. Sleek as patent leather with a gleaming shoe-button eye, It lay motionless, undisturbed by our arrival. We turned the canoe at an angle so we could both get a good view of it. We stuck our paddles straight down into the water to steady the canoe so we could lean even closer. We now noticed its snowy white throat. Inches away from it, I peered into its eye. "It doesn't look dangerous," I said, remembering that poisonous snakes are supposed to have vertical pupils. This snake's pupils appeared to be round. We stayed a while, almost mesmerized by those shiny little eyes. Then we ducked as low as we could under the snake, pulling the branches on either side of the canoe to ease us forward, leaving the snake to his peaceful snooze. Farther along the trail, we met a park ranger in his canoe, and we described the snake to him. "Oh, that's your Cottonmouth," he said. "Good thing you didn't get bit. First your blood turns to water, then your flesh starts to rot, and then you wish you were dead."
Now we're right back home here in Brooklyn for the last one. In New York. Well, we're home, my home. Brooklyn. We're not in Brooklyn yet. Okay. Brooklyn, New York, September 2000. Kennedy Airport, $30. Penn Station, $25. Anywhere in the Bronx, $30. The price to get almost anywhere in the city was posted all over the front window. Inside was one big room with a map of the city and exotic travel posters all over the walls. We wondered what it would cost to hire a car to Tahiti. A driver slouched in one of the broken-down chairs pushed up against the wall. A bulletproof plastic partition separated the front and back rooms. There was a small trapdoor at the partition to safely hand money back and forth, but the door between the rooms was wide open. Behind the partition was a fat man the size of a hippo. The office chair he was sitting on disappeared beneath rolls of fat, as did the phone receiver that he held between his ear and his shoulder. He scribbled addresses on the pad with fingers the size of bananas. He looked up, each of his many chins covered in stubble, and said, "I'll be right with yous." It was then we noticed it. Behind him, all along the wall, was a fish tank, set in a tabletop at eye level. It was 8 feet long and about 10 inches of water. It was a movement that caught our attention. In the tank was a 5-foot-long South American Caiman. In the wild, they are very shy and slide into the water if you approach them. This one moved towards us at our approach and pressed the side of its toothy, grinning face against the glass with an unblinking yellow dinosaur eye, a kaleidoscope of glints and specks of gold and black. Frighteningly vital and rapacious, it moved even closer, still grinning, its tail swishing back and forth, hungry, waiting. "Mice," the fat man said, anticipating our question. "He drowns them first. Where to?" Well, there's lots more stories there, but I think that's enough. If you have any questions, we'd love to answer them. There you go.
When you're both on these trips, are you both like sketching like all the time, constantly, or photographing, and then when you come home, that's when you
We're keeping journals and photographing, and if there's time, sketching. Usually with wildlife, things happen quickly and you move on, and so there's no time to sort of sit there and sketch. So we take photographs of everything, thousands of photographs on these trips, and we both keep journals. The journals are the raw material that.
So the journals are just like written journals.
Written journals. Mm-hmm. I usually describe sort of what we're doing and sort of the story that's happening. And Betsy writes down everything. Writes down the names of flowers, the names of things, all the details and everything. And then we get on the airplane on the way home, and we sort of combine those two things, talk about it, and out of that comes usually a rough manuscript for whatever book that we're going to do. So it kind of is written roughly on the airplane on the way home while it's still fresh. Sometimes we do tape recordings too, which helps if you bring back the sounds of the place. Helps. Weeks later when you're sitting down and putting that all together and editing it, it helps to have that too. So it's just like gathering information and having fun too.
So you don't necessarily have a book in mind
No.
before you go. It kind of gets created.
When we went to Uganda, we had a book. We wanted to do a book about the mountain gorillas. But what we didn't know is how difficult it was going to be. And as we said before, it was our childhood dream, both of us. When we met, that's all we talked about.
First of all, you should say, though, that usually when we went on these trips, we were each looking for our own story. And, you know, for instance, when we went to the Galapagos, I found the blue-footed boobies especially interesting, and I did a book about them, and Ted liked the giant tortoise, and he did a story about that. So that was the way things went until we got to Uganda and we realized neither of us had a story.
Yeah. People used to say, how come you don't do a book together? And we couldn't figure out how to take our different art styles and put them into one volume and make it work. And we got the idea on the plane that the real story was not so much the gorillas themselves, but our trek to see them, the difficult trek to see. So we became the story more than anything else. And it was a perfect way for Betsy to kind of, with her sketches, look like field sketches. They're done from memory, but they look like they're done on the spot. Our trials and tribulations, showing us the sliding down slopes and getting in all kinds of trouble. And then when we got to a particular scene, like we got to see the mountain gorillas, I would sit you right down next to us and make a painting of what we were seeing, a finished full 4-edge painting. So the two styles worked beautifully on that. And that was the first one. And ever since then, when we go on these trips, we look for stories to tell together.
Yeah, it just happens that way now.
Yeah,
It's funny.
Mm-hmm. But we did go to Uganda to see the mountain gorillas specifically. Sometimes we go and say, well, I don't know what's going to happen. So lately we've been, like the last one we did went to Iceland to see the children
Rescuing pufflings.
Pufflings.
And that was something that we had in mind. We knew what was happening, and we were trying to get a story out of that. But earlier books that we did, we just waited until we got there and let the stories unfold, let our experiences inspire stories.
Yeah. And it never let us down.
What's next?
We're not sure. We're thinking about it. Yeah. Fred.
The part where you experienced all the bugs.
Didn't the leeches get you more than?
Only because I was just curious about the insect. Do they eat those kind of insects there? Or
No.
Oh, you mean the ones that were flying in the lights above the beds? No, I think those were just generally gnats. Small flying bugs. Yeah.
No, they don't. As far as I know,
Have you tried any of those the local dishes like that?
No, we tried
Mopani worms in Africa.
And mare's milk in Mongolia, which is like a sour.
Mare's milk.
Yogurt.
What is it called? I forget.
Erig.
Arig, yeah, and it's like a very sour yogurt. It's delicious. And I really like that.
And in Mongolia.
In Mongolia.
And
in South Africa, they have the Mopani trees and the Mopani worms. There's a season when the Mopani worms are eating the leaves before they, go into
big
chrysalis.
fat green caterpillars.
And they gather them and squeeze the guts out, and then Danny's having a stroke.
They pull off the red head, squeeze out the green guts.
And then they fry them in this thick oil. And every time we went there, we went there about 7 times, I guess. And every time they would say, "It's too bad you can't stay another week. It'll be Mopani season." We say, "Darn it, we missed it again."
Yeah.
And then the last time we were there, they said, "You're in luck. We've got the Mopani worms." They saved them for us. Well, the only trouble was they were rancid by that time. The oil, it's just it was like eating popcorn that had been sitting around for a year.
But it's interesting because when you're looking at them laying there, it's very hard to. Yeah. But we took it back to our tent at their insistence, and they don't have electricity, so by lantern light, we were looking up Mopani worms in our field guide and everything, and they were sitting there, and we just sort of kept popping them in without thinking about it. If you didn't see them, it wasn't so bad. And they had this kind of oily, popcorny, weird taste. They're the higher form of protein than beef. That's what people really, they look forward to that because it's a huge protein source for them. They make a very beautiful butterfly when they emerge.
It's not as fun to eat that.
Yeah.
Was there any time you actually felt in real danger for your lives?
Just in Uganda. I was telling the story about after all this planning and getting there with all these civil wars and everything, and then seeing all of those soldiers everywhere and having everyone there so looking over their shoulders and so tentative about whether or not things were going to be okay, that we really got, I would say, nervous, very nervous.
Yeah.
And I remember we were coming back. It's all dirt tracks. There's no roads after all that Civil War. After about 30 miles out of Kampala, you come to a macadam road. So you come out of the bush and on this road. I remember breathing a sigh of relief, but we weren't really feeling safe until we got in the air out of Ugandan airspace. And I thought, well,
Yeah.
we got this done without losing our heads. So.
Yeah, but one thing that was really sad is that we had been there in Uganda in 1970.
It's beautiful country.
The animal life was just resplendent, and the foliage, everything was absolutely beautiful. And there were these beautiful, thriving little African villages.
Traditional.
And that was before Idi Amin. And after Idi Amin's reign, where the military slaughtered most of the animals, the people, of course, lost everything. It was really sad. They were now living in little shacks with corrugated roofs, and
the animal we drive.
Yeah.
3 hours across African veldt without seeing an animal. We'd never experienced that before.
But I'll tell you, walking through that village, and we were the only tourists there at the time we were there, I really was uncomfortable. And I couldn't help just keep looking up at the hills because I knew that's where. And I couldn't imagine one of the townspeople or one of the,
This is where we had lunch in that little
the refugees themselves, running up in the mountain says, "Hey, we got some people down there with cameras and, maybe money." And, I was really afraid of that.
They're very conspicuous.
When
Because
we-
we were the only
Yeah.
people visiting. There was nobody else there.
When we got to the hotel, and this hotel, again, was exquisite. The Mountains of the Moon Hotel was exquisite in 1970. And one of the wonderful things about it was a hot bath, after a day of hiking and animal viewing. And somebody knocked on our door and they said, "Hot bath?" And we said, "Yes, we would love one." And they came in with a tub of hot water
Yeah,
because there was no plumbing.
There was no nothing.
And that night, I was thinking to myself, now what are we going to do if something happens tonight? And Ted had noticed this old man with an old rifle and an ancient dog patrolling the hotel. Like, I don't know what they were going to do. And so I thought, well, we could. There was a stand of evergreens in the center of the plaza. And I was thinking we could run out and just leap into the center of those trees. Nobody would ever realize we were there.
First place they'd look.
That's what I had in mind. And all of a sudden, I heard Ted was sleeping, and I saw light flashing in the window, and I was hearing boom, boom. And I woke him up, and I said, Ted, something's happening. You got to get up. And we looked out the window. It was a storm. And, so he managed to survive that. But that was really scary. And
It
the
was
only
people's attitudes more than anything, because
Yeah.
they were all on the verge. They were all looking. They were frightened from after all those years of living under Idi Amin. They were scared to death of everything. They didn't want to say anything that might go back to somebody and be responsible for saying. So they were very guarded about what they said, what they did. Made us nervous. We weren't used to being in a place like that.
Yeah. The only animal, the really scary animal situation we were in was that we were chased by a lion.
Should read that.
We were in an open.
Yeah, let's read that. That's a
Read
short
that.
read.
And I have to say, that was really scary. I'm not sure. It's
Being chased by animals is not fun, and it's not supposed to happen. I was like, oh, that's exciting.
Yeah,
It's not really exciting.
you're not supposed to incite it,
But it does happen once in a while, and it's adrenaline rush comes. I have to tell you. There.
Whoops. Did I just okay.
Read it.
Okay. This is called Osama bin Laden. It's Kakanika Camp, Okavango. I hope it's safe to say that in here. Okavango Delta, Botswana, May 2007. Our driver Ali saw the lion 200 feet away and stopped the vehicle. "Can we get closer?" we asked. "Not with that lion," he said. We were out gathering firewood when he jumped right on the trailer and tried to leap in the truck with us. I don't get anywhere near that one. "What's his name?" we asked. "He doesn't have a name. He just showed up here recently." "We've got it. How about Osama bin Laden?" Ali liked it. The next day, we saw Osama lying in a thicket with several lionesses. We watched from a good distance for a while as he dozed. A call came over the radio that our truck was needed back in camp because it was the only one with a winch. Another truck would be sent and we could switch. Ali drove some distance away from Osama and met the other truck. We all got out, talking and laughing, standing around. Ali looked over his shoulder and said, "We better get back in the vehicle." Osama had stood up and was glaring at us. As we drove away, the other driver yelled to Ali, "Watch the clutch. It slips once in a while and it might stall." We headed back toward Osama, who was now rigid and staring at us with glowing yellow eyes. Then, for some reason, instead of driving sideways, Ali drove directly up to him and stopped. Osama roared and charged, covering the distance between us in a split second. Ali tried to start the truck. The clutch slipped. It stalled. Osama was alongside the truck. We ducked and cringed, waiting for his sharp claws and teeth. Finally, the truck started, wheels spinning as we lurched forward. Osama stayed right with us. He roared as he looked for a way to get into the open vehicle, and I have to tell you, it's like, oh, oh. You know, this is constantly really scary. Finally, we reached open ground, and the truck sped ahead. Osama broke off the chase at the edge of the forest. His sides heaved, his tongue lolled, and his eyes burned yellow with fury. No one knows where he came from or why he behaved the way he did. Maybe they said he came from an area where hunting is allowed and he'd been shot at. He disappeared the next day, never to be seen again. And I don't know if you can see the posture on this lion from here. We don't have his picture in the show because, you know, we're not reading.
You don't want to really
story.
be seeing that particular thing.
You don't want to see that stance, yeah. But other than that, not really scary, not really life-threatening, I don't think, incidents.
I remember you saying you sprained your ankle on one of your trips. Has there been any other injuries?
Betsy broke her ankle in
Yeah, I broke my ankle in
Thailand.
Thailand. I went to step
That's
off a
there
boat.
too, but it's a longer story.
And somebody who had gotten off the boat left their duffel bag with a handle hanging over the side. And when I stepped off the boat, I caught my foot in it, and the boat was rocking in the water, and it just yanked me up like an animal in a trap. And I was hanging upside down.
Her foot was on the other way.
But
We were about 4 or 5 hours from anywhere. We had to cross a lake, and then we had to flag down just a truck that went along the road. It took an hour before anybody got along the road. And we took us to a clinic, which was another 2 hours away. And they x-rayed it, and it was broken and dislocated. So they called ahead to Phuket, which was on the other side. It's like going from Miami to Tampa. That's sort of what it was. And on the other side of the peninsula there. So when we got there, they were all waiting and waiting to have it operate and put a pin and put it back together again. But that
I tell you, the weird thing was that it didn't hurt. Ted said, well, you were in shock. Well, maybe I was in shock. I don't know. But I know in the boat on the way across the lake, the leader of the trip and his son came along with us. And I was singing, button up your overcoat. You know, so they all started singing. That's what I do when I'm upset. I sang on the way into the operating room. But it was a beautiful hospital.
Yeah.
It was state-of-the-art.
If that had happened anywhere else, like in Uganda, if that happened in Uganda, I don't know what we'd have done. Because the surgeon here at the Hospital for Special Surgery said they need special equipment to do that. And not many hospitals around the world have it. They built one at Phuket because of all the adventure travel. People go there and they rock climb and they ride motor scooters. And everybody's got a broken back or a broken neck or arm. Mostly Americans and Europeans who go there and behave badly and get hurt.
The few days that we had to stay there and I was taking therapy, I was down in the therapy room and this German guy wheeled up to me in a wheelchair and he had this structure, this metal structure holding him straight up like this. And he said, so what happened to you? Motorbike? I said, no, I wouldn't be that stupid. I said, I stepped in and I told him the story. I said, what happened to you? He said, motorbike. I said, oh, myself.
Are you at the point in your career where you plan a trip and you tell your publisher, okay, we're going on a trip, I'll have a book for you in 5 months, or do you ever have to fight to get a book made with them?
No, as a matter of fact, we want it in advance. We don't want anything until we have the thing ready to go. I mean, we know we've got a story. We went to Uganda with the mountain gorillas, and our editor said, well, we'll give you an advance. We said, no, we don't know what's going to happen. We may not get a story. We may not even, there's no guarantee you're going to see them.
And you know how uptight that would make you, that you had this money, now I've got to get a story, and So
we always get back, and when we get the story and we present it, then we get an advance and we start working on it. But it's we feel much more relaxed if we haven't committed to anything. But we tell them we're heading there and we want to get this story. And they said, great, if you get it, I want to do it, you know. But
Are there
Yeah.
any stories they didn't like that you had to?
you know, the only story that didn't get published, it was the only one of the went to the Manu in the Amazon in Peru. It's a very wild area. It's the World Heritage Area. Some tribes that haven't been contacted. You know, it's that kind of very wild place. And we did a book about our adventures getting there. It's 14 hours by dugout canoe down the upper Mother of God River. I mean, that sounds like an adventure, right? And for some reason, we couldn't get interest in that. And one of the stories from it is in this book about the
birds, the macaws that fly to the
salt licks by the hundreds. It's an amazing sight to see. Very few places in the world you can see it. That's what we went to see. But that's the only one that we were kind of disappointed because we had some really nice images and all kinds of stories we wanted to tell. In fact, a couple stories from the story about the. We didn't read the scorpion spider story, did we?
No.
No, we didn't.
So there are
some
a
stories
couple
in
from
here
that, but the publisher that we showed it to felt that she said they're just more animal stories. I don't get anything,
Yeah.
more than that. But we told stories about some of the local tribes, and there was a village of boat makers there.
We
We
traveled
talked
over
about
the
that.
top of the Amazon and then down through the elephant forest, the rainforest, and finally to the river, the upper Mother of God River. 14 hours down by a dugout canoe, and then into the Manu, which is even more remote. And if that doesn't sound like a story, I mean, I don't know what, with jaguars and all, but somehow it didn't go. Just didn't go. So that's the only one. We batted 1,000 and all the rest.
Did you?
Oh, did you ever go someplace and not have a story?
No, that never happened.
No.
Never happened.
Either one or the other, or both of us, or we got one together. Yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
I did a book called Market about markets all over the world, which is kind of a sidelight. I mean, we go to these places, you pass through markets, and they're always colorful and different. Every place in the world, people go and buy and sell things, but they're so different, and they look so different. And it was fascinating to me, so I always took a lot of pictures. And then one day it occurred to me, why don't I just put a book together contrasting these markets all around the world, which I did. And then I wrote a sequel, the second one, from other places that we'd been. And we went to a few places where we went looking for markets to add to it, And so sometimes the stories are side stories. And these are mostly side stories behind the gathering the other stories. That's what I think is fun about this book. It's,
Yeah. Well, the editors of this book said, I don't want any story that has appeared anywhere else,
That's all
in a
original.
book, in an art magazine article, anywhere else. I want everything. I want all fresh material.
And the art is all made for this book too. Some of it was done a few years ago when we come back from trips. I would make images, make paintings of things that really appealed to me, and without an idea where they'd go. And I stuck them in a drawer. And once the stories were told, I pulled them out, and they became some of the illustrations in this book. So that was one of the ways we put this thing together was the material we had. And there's things like journal pages in there. They actually tore out our journal pages and photographed them in there, like memorabilia. The whole thing is like a big scrapbook, the book itself.
Who gets to pick what each of you gets to illustrate?
That's an interesting question.
Like, suppose you go, oh my god, I want to draw that bird, and then you're like, but.
Well, we don't usually argue over that. She said, you do that better than I do, and I say you do that better than I do. We pretty much know.
And it depends on the story that we decided to do a particular story, and then we look at each other's artwork, and we say, should we do a big full color illustration here, because that would be Ted's, sometimes surrounded by my sketches.
It's a funny story, humorous story. It's better for,
Or like lime green rubber boots. I wanted the impact of that soldier, alone. So that's the biggest one of my sketches, other than the maps. Otherwise, they're pretty much storytelling little, animated stuff.
We'll stay here all day and answer. Okay, guys, thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for coming.
Wish we had books to sell.
How many books have you each done?
I've done altogether 200 books.
Wow.
That's counting young adult books too and picture books. Betsy's done over 100, right?
Yeah,
150. over
about 150.
About
No,
150.
no, about just almost 150
Yeah.
books. Yeah.
That's a genius.
Wait a what? We're getting tired.
Thank you.